Conversations is presented by SFU Public Square, and we want to thank our sponsors, SFU Vancouver and SFU Public Square City Program. We would like to acknowledge that this event is taking place on unceded traditional Coast Salish territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, and we thank them for their forbearance for this. Who is new to City Conversation? Just raise your hands. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. This is not a lecture series. This is a participation series. We don't have speakers and we don't have an audience. Instead, we have presenters and we have participants, and you are the participants. The presenters are going to briefly frame the conversation. Today, though, because we have 4 of them, 6 minutes apiece. But most of the time, most of this hour is devoted to your questions, but particularly your opinions and your observations. So don't think of just asking questions of our presenters. We want to hear what you think, right? It is not rude to eat lunch at City Conversations. Whoever brought their lunch, thank you so much. We encourage you to do so. If you're tweeting, it's at CityCom, CITYCONV. And if you are new and are not on our email list, we invite you to join us. I believe some sheets will be passed around. Just put your name and email address on, and you'll get notifications of our events. This will be the last event of 2019. We take a break in December because everybody else takes a break in December. We'll be back in January, and we've got a tremendous lineup for this. Granville. Major changes are proposed for 2 of Vancouver's icons that are linked by name and proximity. One is largely reviled and the other is beloved, but somewhat faded. The Granville Bridge, this City Conversations precedes the 3rd phase of public consultation on proposals to convert 2 lanes of the 8-lane Granville Bridge to cycling and pedestrian paths. The bridge was built in 1957 to provide freeway access for automobiles to downtown, but the connecting freeways were never built, fortunately. I think most people would agree. And the bridge has never even approached its capacity, not even half of its capacity. 62 years later, the bridge needs significant structural safety work, and the city is redesigning it for current and future transportation needs. And those needs have changed. So we're going to hear about that. And Granville Island. The bridge crosses over it. It's one of Vancouver's premier attractions. Its charming mix of industrial funk, art, theater, and food is envied around the world and replicated around the world. But it's a bit tired. The Emily Carr University of Art and Design decamped to Mount Pleasant, leaving a major building deserted, one of 2 still deserted, and there have been no significant innovations in years. So a critical article in Tyee by David Beers, who joins us today, and Renaerts, detailed the island's deficiencies, but a new governance group has revitalization plans, and they're thinking big. So how do we connect the 2? Joining us for this conversation today, Paul Kruger is Transportation and Public Space Planner at the City of Vancouver. Bethany Dobson is a planner for Granville Island. Dale McClanagan is the past chair of the Granville Island Trust and a member of the Granville Island Council, a new organization that's been established. And David Beers, founding editor of the Tyee. Over to you.
Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. right, thanks for having me. So improving the Falls Creek bridges has been a high priority for the city since at least the early 2000s. We've made big progress and big change on the Burrard Bridge already. We've made some interim improvements on the Canby Bridge. Well, we've got a lot of work to do on the Granville Bridge, so let's talk about that. So the bridge was completed in 1954, and it was a freeway-style bridge designed to connect to future freeways that, again, thankfully, were never built. Here you can actually see a picture of how the north end of the bridge would have connected into a freeway system in our downtown. This is Drake Street. Just imagine that for a moment. It's 8 lanes wide, very wide lanes that encourage high speeds, pretty narrow sidewalks, and no bike lanes whatsoever. And it has these unsignalized ramps at either end that cause all kinds of problems. For example, crossing those ramps, it's a little bit like playing Frogger. And you gotta wait for a break in traffic, and hopefully everyone stops for you and you can make it across. Actually had to buy my friend a beer afterwards for walking across with me with his wife and child. If you're lucky enough to cross the ramp, there are steps at either end that make it inaccessible for people who use mobility aids like wheelchairs or scooters, or even someone with a stroller. And then if you make it to the bridge itself, the sidewalks are pretty narrow and you're next to high-speed traffic, not the most comfortable. And then if you get to either end, you have these ramps that go this way and that. If you don't know where you're going, there's a very good chance you'll get lost. And then finally, there are no bike lanes whatsoever. So relatively few people ride this bridge relative to other bridges. And you're either mixing with high-speed traffic, which isn't comfortable for anybody, or you're on the sidewalk where there really isn't space, and that's not good for anyone either. Fortunately, there's a lot of excess capacity on the bridge, so even if all of the lanes feeding onto the bridge are filled with traffic, traffic on the bridge itself is still relatively light. There are over 25,000 people taking transit across the bridge every day on 6 different bus routes. And it's also an important bridge for regional motor vehicle movement, with about 65,000 car trips per day on a busy day. If you look at the numbers on this map, you can see the volumes are a little different depending on the ramp. And so lots of capacity on the bridge itself, but then at the ends, we need to be pretty careful about what we do just to make sure we're not causing too much congestion. There are thousands and thousands of people living within a short walk or bike ride of the bridge. So we feel that if it were safe and comfortable, there's a lot of potential for people to use it. Earlier this year, we launched a 3-phased public engagement. The first phase in April was really about no specific options, but sharing, talking about the draft goals and seeing if we have those right, giving people a chance to share their experiences and their ideas and their hopes and their fears. And then in September, we went out with 6 shortlisted options and gave public a chance to review and comment on those. And then early in the new year, we will be coming out with a preferred option. And then later in the spring, we will be going to council with a recommendation. Subject to council approval, we would do detailed design and hopefully build it the year after. But again, that's really up to council. We've employed a lot of different engagement tactics to talk to a lot of different people. Very, very high participation rates, a lot of excitement about the project, talking with citizens and users of the bridge and potential users of the bridge and very different kinds of stakeholders with different interests. And we've seen high levels of support across the board for this project. Some of the things we've learned, I don't think it's surprising, people are not comfortable walking across the bridge. The left chart shows them. They're not comfortable on their own. And on the right, certainly not comfortable walking with a child or someone who might need a little bit of help. And as bad as it is for walking, it's even worse for cycling. People are not comfortable cycling on their own, and certainly not with someone who's a little less comfortable, like somebody new to cycling or a child. And there's a lot of latent demand. We ask people, do you ever avoid using it even when it would be the most direct route? And a lot of people do. So just again, suggesting the high potential for usage. So in April, we brought up 5 draft goals. The first goal is really about making the bridge accessible, safe, and comfortable for walking and rolling and cycling. The second was about providing direct and convenient connections. to key destinations, not just Granville Island, but also the bridge at either end. The third was the opportunity to make it a really special experience. The fourth was accommodating motor vehicles in transit and emergency services. And the last was about really thinking about the future and connecting, looking at the potential for an elevator to Granville Island, which again is different jurisdiction. Lots of support for the draft goals, lots of ideas for how they could be delivered, some ideas for missing goals. And so we revised the goals to touch on those things. I'm told I'm almost out of time here, so I'm going really quick. Lots of draft goals, I'm not going to go into them. But that led into us looking at a whole bunch of different options for the bridge. Is the path on the west side? Is it on the east side? Is it on both sides? Is it in the middle and above traffic? Or is it something underneath? We took a long list of options and we whittled it down to a short list. And then we took a short list of 6 options to the public for review. And I won't get into what the 6 options are, but I will say for this conversation that all of them are compatible with the potential future elevator and staircase to Granville Island. We haven't been pushing that too much on the city side because that's not our jurisdiction, but we've been designing for future compatibility. And so if an elevator did come to the city, we'd be interested in, maybe putting a full signal on the bridge and bus stops on the bridge and have that be a gateway to Granville Island. And so I will leave it there, other than to say that please come out to our public engagement early in the new year when we present a preferred option. Thank you.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming. My name is Bethany Dobson and I'm a planner for CMHC Granville Island. And today I'm going to be talking about some of the transportation projects that we're currently working on. I'll start by introducing Granville Island 2040. So this is a process that we launched in 2016 to develop a vision for the island's development from now and over the next 20 years. And through a number of public and stakeholder events, what we really heard is that people love Granville Island. They want to build on its past success and they want us as CMHC to take bold steps to get there. The main ideas are captured in these 4 strategies. The first one is improve access. 2, expand the public market and create a market district. 3, embrace arts and innovation. And 4, restore and sustain the public realm. And this first one is what I'll be talking about today. We also released a transportation strategy early last year, and this talks about a lot of different ideas that we've heard for improving access to the island. Today I'm only going to talk about 4 of them, but there's a lot more ideas in this report. I'm also just going to talk a bit about the context of people coming to Granville Island. So we know that less and less people are driving. It really reflects the trends we've been seeing in the greater region. Here you can see this graph summarizes 2 transportation reports we had done in 2016 and 2005. And you can really see the percentage of people, the mode split has really dropped, but also the total number of people has dropped significantly, even though between these 2 studies, we had about a 10% increase in visitors. So more and more people are coming, but less people are driving. I'd also just like to point out, you can see our transit mode split is quite low in the rest of the city. I think it's closer to 16%. And also in this time, you can see our cycling almost doubled, which is really what we're seeing in the rest of the city as well. Building on this, these are our transportation targets for 2030. You might recognize this. 1/3 trips by private vehicle, 2/3 by sustainable modes. This is the same as the city of Vancouver. We adopted them as our own as well. And when this, they used to be by 2040, but when the city declared a climate emergency and moved all their targets up to 2030, we decided to do the same thing. So now let's talk about some of the major projects we're working on. I'll start with parking because this is the one that's been in the news the most. Earlier this year, on June 1st, we introduced a new parking model on the island. And what we really wanted to do was simplify parking conditions. We know we've heard the story that parking on the island can be a nightmare. Even though we have over 1,200 parking stalls, you come on a summer Saturday and it can be really hard to find one. So we really wanted to introduce a new system that's easier for people to use and to understand. Our old system was a mixture of free and pay stalls. We really found this wasn't working because some drivers were willing to search for a free stall, maybe going by an available pay stall, adding to the congestion on the island. It was very confusing for people, particularly the first-time visitors who would come. Is it stall free? Is it pay? So we wanted a new system that's much easier. We worked very closely with our tenants. We had a number of public engagement events. And what we decided to implement is one model for the whole island where it's all free before 11, all free after 6 p.m., and then it's pay parking between 11 and 6. So really trying to target that peak congestion time, trying to increase parking availability and really decrease the anxiety for people driving to the island. Another thing we've been working on is improving active transportation connections. So even though we are in a very central location, we feel very disconnected from the existing transportation network. So this is something we've been working with the city, with the Granville Connector team, that whatever alignment that they choose, that we've been working with them, how will it feed into the existing bike network, how can we further improve on that to connect to Granville Island. And we've been working with the Broadway planning team, who are really looking at this whole corridor, how can we improve north-south cycling connections. We've also been working to encourage cycling and reduce bike theft. As I mentioned, cycling almost doubled since 2005, but Granville Island used to be the #1 hotspot for bike theft in the region. So we've been working with the VDP and Project 5 to 9 to offer a number of different initiatives, including free bike valet in the summer, a loaner lock program, the VDP to bait bikes. And with all these, we've been able to reduce bike theft by 70% between 2015 and 2017. So we've seen that they've been very successful. The last thing I'll talk about is improving accessibility with an elevator. When we've been seeing the designs that the city's been putting out with more bicycle and pedestrian connections, we'd really like to tap into that. But we also see this as a big opportunity to improve our transit mode split. As I mentioned at the beginning, our transit is much lower than the rest of the city. And on Granville Island, there might not be a lot of connections coming to the island, but above us on the bridge, there's about 1 bus every 2 minutes. So we'd really like to tap into that. And I'll just end by showing these 2 different graphs. This is our existing transit accessibility. And if you look at the darker colors, most people don't want to spend over 30 minutes on the bus. You can see it's really centered directly around the island. But if you add an elevator, that darker shade really grows. And I know there's an impression that's mostly tourists on the island, particularly in summer. But our studies show that about 30 to 50% are coming from Vancouver, another 25% from Metro Vancouver. So we really see this as a big opportunity to maybe help some people switch to transit and also bring new visitors coming on transit to the island. Thank you.
David Beers?
Hi. So I was introduced as having written a critical article about Granville Island. I just want to say, no, not necessarily. I wrote an article in which we gave voice to critics. I particularly don't have I'm not up here to present a vision for Granville Island. What I thought I could do is report on our reporting. I did a story with this story with my colleague Emma Renaerts, who at the time was an intern at Tyee, who's UBC graduate school journalism student. And we arrived at this story the way you often get a story in a newsroom. People poke at you. They say, we are not, our story, our narrative, our version of events is not being fully or properly presented in the public conversation. And we'd like you to listen to us and give us voice. And so that tends to send you off on a journey where you talk to a lot of people and you sort of weigh what everybody's saying and you try to present it in a fair fashion. And that's actually what this story is, but it is full of critical voices. And it would almost have to be because of the history of Granville Island. So I think that's what I'll take my remaining 4.5 minutes to tell you a little bit about is the history of the character of Granville Island. So the point I would make, first of all, is that its history and its regulation are utterly unique within Vancouver and the region. And that is why the potential to innovate new urban forms, new urban experiences, and new urban business models is so real there in ways that it's not somewhere else. It's like a science fiction novel. If you want to create a utopia, you change some laws of physics. Suddenly we can travel in time, or we can go faster than light. Granville Island, the fact of the matter is that the feds own it. And the feds, and so therefore it is not subject to the zoning and regulation of Vancouver as a whole. Nor is it necessarily beholden to the same market forces, rent, profits, etc. And so that allows for you to really build an alternative universe on Granville Island. And that was the formation of Granville Island. After it had been stolen from the First Nations, which is how most stories in this region start, it was an industrial zone. It's called Mud Island. And it became run down and toxic, and something had to be done. And so a committee was struck. Local notables, I think was the term used in one newspaper story. And they were given a blank slate. And this was the 70s, I guess. Was it 70s? Yeah. And so there was this kind of, this Buckminster Fuller experimental ethos in the land. And so the idea of Granville Island originally wasn't to create a really cool magnet for tourists. That was not the idea. The idea was to create some kind of new model for how people could create, and not only create things, but experiences, and share them with those who lived amongst us. And if people wanted to come from elsewhere in the world, that would be fine. So that'd be the point one I'd make as we go forward and we listen to these conversations about what to do with the Granville Bridge. And there's a great opportunity there to just build something fantastic for us. And if we do, the world will come. Now, it being a contested space, it being this amazing space with different rules, it immediately became contested. And what you have right now on Granville Island is you have a small group of people who actually were there from the beginning. They still remember, they are like the original utopians. And they still remember what they wanted Granville Island to be. And they wanted it to be this place where artisans did their thing and art was happening everywhere. And everybody wasn't utterly ruled by the most, draconian market forces. And we know that Vancouver right now is ruled by some very draconian global market forces. And so this is a very precious space. And the first thing we ran into was that this group of people were complaining about, you aren't part of this, I'm sure, but the CMHC, because that's the federal organization that controls Granville Island. And for years they had governed it fairly, this is debated, but they pretty much had their hands on the steering. Dale's going to update my story in a second, so maybe it's got a happier ending. But at the time, in the summer, there was a lot of frustration on the end because the complaint was the utopians, and I don't use that in a disparaging sense, felt that more and more Granville Island was being ruled and run by as like a shopping mall. Its job is to drag in paying tourists and people looking for something to do on a Sunday, but it wasn't a thriving alternative universe, another alternative economic example. And that had to do everything, then like all these whenever you have a congested space, it always comes down to a governance story. And that's what this story is, and you can tell by the headline, struggle for the soul of Granville Island, who will control this future. Read the story and you find that we came across these fascinating documents that were produced several years back as a visioning process, and some of them were kept secret and out of the public eye because they were really more sweeping and experimental than what the CMHC was willing to sign on to. The CMHC's job is to manage risk. I'm not trying to villainize the CMHC, I'm trying to show you the two groups that are kind of tussling. So what we have here in Granville Island today is, and I'm interested to hear what Dale has to say about it, is that since this article was written, some of that visioning process has come to fruition in the form of a new committee, new advisory group that has some name that I forget, council, that's made up of a different makeup of people. There's still people grumbling about who's on that, who's not, but it's a bit more democratic and a bit more diverse. And that's where I'm going to leave off the story and Dale can finish it.
Thanks, David. So my first slide starts the same as Bethany's does, but the story that I'd like to point out is I think David's description of the history is entirely accurate, and he's hit the essential points. And but I'm not a journalist, and but I think I'll actually be a little more critical than you on that history. And can you hear me now? Okay, thank you. I've been involved with Granville Island on the trust for about 10 years, and I joined Alma Lee, who's here, and a number of others on an advisory committee to CMHC. And what I learned quickly was, if they don't ask you questions, if they don't give you pertinent information, then tea will be lovely, and you will not get any sense of purpose or fulfillment. We would validate directions, and we would look at the financials, and many of the four very fine managers that I dealt with while in that 10-year period were very strong and very dedicated, but they did not work for us. They worked for somebody in Ottawa who I'd never ever met. So shortly after, by 2003, I pulled this out of my archives, I was on a speaking campaign, and with the support of the trust, we all agreed that there was a deficiency, defect in the governance system. And the version that I presented back, my findings back in 2003, that we had to meet the changing values of the people of Vancouver, that we had to remain relevant to the people of Vancouver. There is an exceedingly strong public protectiveness of the island and of the experience and of the vision. And so that is a voice of support, but it may be a voice of resistance when you go to make a change. You need to have the trust to make the changes. And that there's lots of opportunities on the island to intensify its use, particularly if we can displace parking and replace it with cool buildings. And we needed to find a way to make existing tenants able to reinvest in their endeavors, and we need to refresh and keep current with new tenants. So I would expand this to say that even back in 2003, there was a lot of uneasiness between tenants and management about that relationship. And what we needed to do is attract emerging city activities that are of interest to people in the city. And as David said, and then the tourists will come. Well, if you engineer for the tourists, you're going to lose the thread. So this is what we were after. This was our analysis back in 2003, that we had to get a self-financing financial model. We needed to evaluate the planning and design potential, and we needed to get a governance system that reflected local needs, local knowledge, and could move forward with that vision, which David has done a great job articulating. Everyone that studies the island struggles to articulate it well, but there's something special that if you don't know and understand and experience the island over time, you're not going to get a sound feeling for that. So what I'm happy to report is somebody else saw a defect in the governance system and the state of the island, and it's I think more so its potential than the state of decline. And I think that person is Evan Siddle, who is the president of CMHC. And so his response was to commission the 2040 vision. And that was led by Dr. Stevenson. And he did a great job of commissioning local experts, guys like Bruce Hayden and HCMA, engineering studies. So he spent a lot of money to get it right and included, and they came up with 4 major strategic directions, one of which Bethany's working on in terms of improving access. We want to make improve the access, expand the market, create a market district, embrace arts and innovation, and restore and improve the public realm. And also to repair the governance so that we have local people that care for and understand the island, recognize its diversity, has an element of representativeness of the region so that we get it right. And I've been involved in these discussions on just the governance topic for, well, like I said, 10 years. I'm really happy to say we're reaching that conclusion. This may be my last speech on the structure. If governance is the most interesting thing, you have lost the thread. So you do not want to lose the thread. The recommendation by Dr. Stevenson in his report was to have the island accountable to the government of Canada through CMHC. A big analysis, talk to everyone, who's the best agency for that stewardship? Answer is CMHC. Okay, provided, and this is what's in place now, is a community-based council with 7 members, 2 appointed by CMHC, 1 happens to be in Ottawa, 1 person appointed by the city, and the rest, I would say, are community folks. There is our chair, who asked me to come today, Heather Deal, has lots of experience around the city, as you know, and a particular passion for cultural and arts affairs and management. We have some public relations people, we have some business types, kind of like me, we have real estate types, we have finance types, we have strategic planning, but we also have a good mix. I think they're diverse. Fortunately, we have a young woman who's very bright, very engaged, and under 40, which I think we should emphasize. We need, frankly, more women and younger people. I would say that the council's now up and running, established. Oh, I ran out of time, and I've got about 4 important things to do. Hire a general manager that understands the vision and can help the council set policy and strategic direction. The council has to establish genuine community engagement on and off the island, and that's going to be a bit of a work in progress, but that's a critical thing to earn and to perpetuate the trust and license so that we can do the other big challenges, which is get public funding for this public asset. We can, as community, can ask much more effectively than somebody in the CMHC structure, that we have to enable our existing tenants to thrive and grow. We need to be open to new, young, innovative uses, which is what will be the measure of Granville Island's success. We've been given an opportunity through this new governance system. We hope that you'll be proud of the results.
Okay. Participants, it is now your turn. Again, ask questions, particularly make observations, express your opinions, raise your hand. We've got a couple of microphones. We'll get a microphone to you. And we'll start over there.
Hi, thank you for this.
And tell us your name, please.
Sure, my name is Claire and I live in South Granville. And I have work in the downtown core and I bike almost daily to the downtown core. And so I thank you for this because Granville is of course going to be the most direct route. I bike daily and I go to lots of events in the evening, lots of business meetings or networking events, and I'm often exhausted by the time I have to bike home. And so I have a very short request for you. And that is that the reason I take Granville Bridge home on occasion is because I am very, very tired and I don't want to bike up any more hills. And I mean, seriously, I only take Granville Bridge, which is the most dangerous way to get home, when I am exhausted. And so I wanted to request, please, that the fur exit onto the south side be maintained as a bike lane and that it does not get used only for cars because fur is the only lane, the only way to get home without going down that Granville Hill. Thank you very much.
You said that one of the options seems to be preferred by a majority of people, and what is that?
Yeah, so I'm not quite at liberty to say what the preferred option is because our schedule got pushed a little bit. But I can say that one of the shortlisted options talked about a two-way bike extension along the fur ramp to 10th Avenue, which is a very level connection and could really change how people get around. And we heard a lot of excitement from a lot of people about that option. We heard it. We heard that deeply, and so that's the thing we are very much considering right now.
Okay, who's? Yep, your name, please.
My name's Amy Walker. Hi, David, and hi, Paul. I have been working on Granville Island for the last 5 years in a felting studio in Reylsburg Alley, which is a great place to work if you have the chance to do that. But through that time, I've met a lot of the residents of Granville Island, the artists, the merchants. And I used to work on Granville Island at Blackberry Books in the 80s, so I know what it was like back in the old days. There's a lot. So I'm going to share a number of thoughts, and not necessarily a question, but there's other people in this room who might be able to pick up some of the threads of what I'm going to say. I notice on the panel there's no representative from the arts community on Granville Island, and I wonder why that is. I feel like there's a lot of voices that aren't being heard, as David Beer said. I don't speak on this issue very often, but I'm finding myself quite emotional at this moment because the time I've spent on Granville Island has been very meaningful, and I've made a lot of good friendships, and I feel like the people who bring life and bring culture and bring art alive on the island are being abused and being misrepresented and just not appreciated. So I think missing from maybe the governance discussion that you shared, Dale, was the process of reaching out to artists and the process of just looking at a very practical way to bring the facilities up to code and make them livable by artists to work. So just take that Emily Carr North building and make it into spaces where people can work, and then reach out to artists and invite them to work there. And we've been watching it for 2 years sit empty. And that's, we just saw the culture crawl, and there was a displacement theme, and there's a lack of spaces. They closed down the Acme building where 50 artists work in the downtown east side. So anyway, thank you for listening to these thoughts. When I first heard about the troubles on Granville Island between the community and the governance, I thought, why don't we in light of the climate crisis, why don't we make Granville Island's purpose to be a place for environment and a place for arts and a place for education? So we use our creative, problem-solving, world-changing artists to help us problem solve our way out of climate crisis and educate the public. Thank you.
We are planning, you'll have an opportunity, but just so that you know, we are planning a conversation on artist displacement for next year.
Yeah, it's just a brief comment. First, I want to acknowledge that the relationship and the between artist tenants on the island and management, there has been a huge amount of fear voiced for quite a long time on behalf of the artists and craftspeople. And I think that there is the length of time that the island has not launched on a renewal has exacerbated fears that are logical, but I'm happy to say not, I don't think they're well founded. The art and culture side receive subsidized rents that are below market, which makes them inevitably feel vulnerability if they don't get renewed. Clearly the place needs more money, and it certainly cannot be coming out of the existing tenant rent structure. Now that is not the feeling that tenants have been getting. So I would like to say that we're well aware on the council of the challenge of renewal on the island to take advantages of creating more space, better managing the space that we have, and I think frankly work on alleviating some of these concerns, and where we find genuine managerial problems to have them adjusted. I would say that the current structure of the governance is not going to be changed. The representation within that will evolve over time, but we're going to work on another level to make sure that people that want to participate in how we change in the future and how we surface and identify what may be policy problems get addressed appropriately. The goal is to shift from this kind of paper or this kind of conceptual stuff into actual policy change and management improvements, if I would put it that way. The representation, by the way, was selected by the community committee, which was part of the Granville Island 2040 process, and that was headed by the former chair of the Granville Island Trust, James Stackle.
Thank you.
Can I just add I'll just add a real quick comment. So what we heard just now, we heard a ton of when we were doing our reporting. And there was a sense that a place that had been created literally out of the shack-like studios of very risk-taking visionary artists was now increasingly taking those artists for granted, and was becoming, again, this kind of place where managed risk leading to decisions that created cookie cutter kind of approaches is where it was going. So my point on this would be, we all know where the economy seems to be headed. I have a 24-year-old and a 19-year-old. I see the world through their eyes. They don't expect full-time jobs. They want to be artisans. They want to care about the work they do. They want to connect with other people. I think it would be good to look at Granville Island not as some kind of charity case where we're nice to artists, but rather as an experimental zone, a prototype, and prototypes cost more money than the final product that we are investing in to show a different way of running the economy. So that's the hope I have for Granville Island.
Here, and you may please.
Hello, I'm Alma Lee, and I was on the Granville Island Trust for 15 years. Dale was the chair. My question is specifically to Dale, actually. With this new council, I've had reservations, as you know, from this since the beginning. I think that this council has been organized by CMHC. It's got 2 people from CMHC on it. It's reporting to CMHC. Its general manager position is on CMHC letterhead. Why are you not reporting directly to the minister? You know, I mean, to me, it's ridiculous that you're having to go to CMHC as an autonomous body, when in fact you should be autonomous, and by that autonomy, you should be reporting to the minister, not to CMHC. Thank you.
Over the course of the last 10 years, we've had a lot of discussions about what's the optimal structure, what structure is available, and the Airport Port Authority independent autonomous unit was not available for various legislative reasons. So the way it was left is the council, which is largely community members, and subsequent nominations will be among those community members, will continue to, for the, frankly, statutory reasons, continue to account to the Government of Canada through CMHC. And having been through all the other options that were unavailable, we have what we have. I think we've got the essential ingredients to be able to improve the situation, but honestly, we'll just have to keep at it. The structure is not up for further debate. Membership should be, or will be over time.
Okay. Question? Yes.
My name is Richard Evans. I'm a resident of Falls Creek South, which is your immediate neighbor to the east. And the genesis of our neighborhood is very similar to the, same time really as Granville Island. Share the same philosophical goals in terms of renewal. We're going through a process of renewal, so I'm looking forward to a good relationship with the new governance of Granville Island. I do have a specific question though about the bridge and the access. And there was no heavy lines on the Hemlock Street on-ramp. What's going on with that? What's the vision for that?
Yeah, so I mentioned we looked at dozens and dozens of options, and generally alignment is it on one side or the other, or both sides, or in the middle, and so forth. And we also looked at potential additional connectivity on the ramps, in particular the Fir ramp and the Hemlock ramp really serve different parts of the city towards the south. And so some of the options we looked at have additional bike connections on the Fir ramp or the Hemlock ramp, and also include additional walking improvements on those ramps. And so those are things that we've been looking at and we are looking at. So, it's a thing we're looking at. I don't want to say more of this. No, like that's true.
My name is Carr. During the 70s and 80s, I lived on the Fairview Slopes, and we saw Granville Island as our neighborhood market, where all these other people came from. And of course, we walked there. I travel about half the time, and throughout the world, there are so many wonderful pedestrian malls, pedestrian areas, even pedestrian islands. Why are we still considering 30% private vehicles for 2040?
That was a great question. I would say the main criticisms that we get are either we need to ban cars or we need to add more parking in terms of transportation. So those are really the two anchors that we hear. We are looking at a number of pedestrian first improvements on the island. I think when Granville Island was first developed in the 70s, it was really nothing like it had been done before. This mixture of cars and pedestrians, all in the same space. But in terms of walkability, I think our standards have changed. And in terms of walkability, there are a lot of improvements that could be made on the island. At this point, it is still very much a working island. We have quite a few different tenants, grocery stores, artists, people selling equipment. We have the working boatyard on the island. So while we're looking at reducing vehicle traffic, because it's a working island, it's not it would be very, we're not looking at totally taking vehicle traffic off the island.
Only private vehicles I was talking about, you can still have a deck with
No, and I think that's a really great point, and it's definitely something that maybe certain parts of the island shutting down to vehicle traffic as a process.
Opening up to people, it's not shutting down. If you open up a pedestrian.
No, that's a great point. Yeah, thank you.
On the
Okay.
other hand, if you are a small vendor and you need to pick up something on the island, you have to, sometimes I need a car on there.
Okay.
There's a hotel on the island.
Who,
And it's a
do you have somebody here? Yes, thank you.
Hi,
I'll just be really
forward.
I'll just be really short. I'm one of those lucky people who lives in Falls Creek South too. I ride my bike, I go to Granville Bridge. If I'm riding my bike, it's not far, but as I'm trying to get onto the Granville Bridge is very challenging. And there's a two solution for me to get to the market, which I use a lot, and also to walk on the bridge, which I like to use a lot as well, is a bridge. Currently, I know your staircase is going to happen in 20 years, but if there could be a staircase like there is on Canby Street Bridge, down to Island Park Walk, now as part of this bridge improvement, it would actually satisfy both Granville Island access as well as people who live in Falls Creek South.
Yeah, thank you for sharing.
I got a little tiny shout out from Dale, but my name is Bruce Hayden. I'm an architect and I work both on the latest Granville elevator study and the 2040 plan. And one of the interesting exercises I did as part of that study was to actually read all the founding documents of Granville Island and all of the studies that had been done on Granville Island for many, many years. It was such a fabulously interesting one because what I got out of it was that it wasn't actually, the details of the governance structure weren't important. The issue was, did we have people in power that were willing to take risks? And that was so interesting because in fact, if you look at the way we do our planning process now, all our planning processes now are largely around mitigating fear. And we actually have to be honest about it. Those are the kind of politicians we want. We don't get people showing up at public hearing saying take more risks. We get people showing up at public hearing saying do fewer things that might threaten my view of the world. So what we need is, I absolutely passionate, we shouldn't leave creativity to the arts, we should leave creativity, we should have creative politicians as well, and we need to actually ask ourselves what we're asking of our politicians. One of the examples, and I think the public engagement process is always a challenging one. I always say the example of that, people would say, well, do you believe the entire waterfront should be fully publicly accessible, for example? And everyone would go, absolutely, of course, that's a high value. And I go, do you like Granville Island? I'll say, yeah, it's the greatest place. If I show up at a public meeting and say, I want to put a cement batching plant next to a market, I am going to get killed. Roasted and everything. I will be called an idiot, I will be called stupid. So one of the things we actually have to think about from a governance perspective is how do we allow and support people to take risks even if we don't like the things that they're doing? And it's a really difficult question.
I'm not an expert in this area, but I will add one component to what Bruce said, is that there is a logic within the bureaucracy of the municipal government and all of them, the real estate corner of the offices, and their job is to always arrive at the highest and best use of the land. And they tend to run that equation through what market forces are telling them about what could be done with that land, because they feel a fiduciary responsibility to make a bunch of money off that land. So if you're going to develop some public land, you're going to build, if you follow that logic, you will, and you use that formula, you will build high rises for those who can pay the most money. We have enough of those now, I think. I don't think we have enough really interesting experimental zones that might show us a new way to live in the near future when a lot of the facts of our economy and our environment have changed. So I think highest and best use of land might need a new equation, a new tweak. Right?
Yep. You notice I just about grab the microphone, but that's what I agreeing so much. The, going back and looking at the history as Bruce did, you will see that when the island was originated, it was community decision makers that were on the trust that were calling the shots. And that committee was able to hire young architects like Norm Hudson and Jos Bakker and others to inform the island of what was current. And I look at that success story as a model for my personal behavior. Behind the scenes were some old gray-haired guys, I qualify, who were of the bureaucracy. They were from the institutions. And what they did was they protected the island from encroachment by institutional imperatives and from people that would control it in a completely predictable way, like the city of Vancouver at the time. My job is to look after the governance, to keep encroachment from institutional imperatives, to build the sandbox so that young people can come and provide the creative solutions and examples that we did back in the 70s. I will never be adjudicated what's cool, but if somebody wants to come and stake out the island for some sort of other non-vision use, they're gonna have to go through me and the rest of the council and Alma and Jessica. And that's why the defect of our governance was not having an authentic, legitimate community authority to mitigate those sort of things, to take the risks, and to tell people, frankly, we're going to be a little bit of a nuisance too.
One last comment, question. You ready with somebody? Please go ahead.
My name is Vic Khanna. I'm a technology entrepreneur. I live in Oak in 25th, and I walk probably about 50, 60 times a year down the Granville Bridge. And I would like to echo this concept of risk. We have something here that could be absolutely magical. So, you know, when we go to Manhattan, cross the bridge, you know, you got something there that's amazing. It's great for locals, it's great for tourists. So when I look at the options for the bridge, and I go, well, there should be only one. That's, you know, the 2 lanes down the middle, make a big statement, and it should be powerful. And you know, it will cost more money, but it's well worth it. Now, in terms of money, I'm an entrepreneur, and I believe that there should never be any housing on Granville Island, like everyone here probably. However, I think that there's a very, very good entrepreneurial tie-in for development, and that is the hospitality industry. So I don't know if that's been addressed or, you know, we can expand that, but in Vancouver in general, there's a dearth of hotel rooms, and you see this Airbnb phenomenon going crazy, and that's why they're probably not clamping down on it too much, because they need the tourists to stay somewhere. So I think that's an opportunity for Granville Island.
Quick comment, we're at our time.
No, just to say that the kind of that middle path was one of the 6 options that we've been looking at. One of the trade-offs is, you know, I heard a comment about have good connectivity on the fur ramp, good connectivity on the hemlock ramp. And so a challenge with that middle option is it makes those connections to those ramps a little more challenging. So there's some really interesting trade-offs within the different options. So, but then I would also say that what I'm hearing from you is there's a tremendous opportunity to do something special. And so that is one of the overarching goals of the project, but also, you know, as we narrow down in on one option and we get to council and we're looking at, there's gonna be different pressures to deliver this project on budget or look at different ways it could happen. That's something for everyone to pay attention to in terms of how that decision moves forward. And I'll leave it there.
And we have to leave it there because we are out of time. It's 1:30. We always stop promptly at 1:30 because we know that many of you have to get back to work. Thank you all. Please join me in thanking our presenters today. And we have some gifts of honey for each of you. Thank you all.
It's very sweet of you.